Time for a news and comment podcast, and there is so much news to comment on.
Peter B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, and I think this is the real Black Friday, December 1st, 2017, because the Republican-controlled Senate is about to ram through a tax cut bill for corporations and the wealthy that features a tax increase for the rest of us. And nobody has actually read the entire bill. They are tweaking it and making changes to it, even as senators prepare to vote. And there's a whole list of amendments supplied by lobbyists that we'll share with you in just a moment. But this truly is a dark day, because while the Republicans claim a majority in the Senate and the House, we know that it's based on a minority of the American population. We've covered that in previous podcasts. And what they are about to do will expand the disparities of wealth and income between the have-mores and the have-nots, the rest of us in this country. And this will have a long-term impact. It is radical in the extreme. And yet there were no hearings. 20 hours of meaningless debate. And we've seen posturing Republicans from John McCain to Jeff Flake to Bob Corker and even Susan Collins indicate that they're ready to fall in line because they got some goodies by wheeling and dealing in this process. And this is one of the ugliest episodes of American legislation that I have seen in a long, long time. And the sleight of hand that is used, the lies that have been laid out to support this legislation, they really represent a new low. So we have Jeff Flake, who said that he got on board because he has found, he's been assured that there will be fair and permanent protections for the DACA population. And I care a lot about the DACA population. They're being held hostage right now because Trump ended their protection and threw them into the lion's den of Congress. And there are many aspects of this tax bill that don't relate to taxes. And I believe that violates the reconciliation rules of the Senate that nominally permit the Republicans to pass this with a simple majority instead of the 60 votes required, typically, to end debate. Bob Corker of Tennessee, he still is an undeclared senator. And he claims to be a deficit hawk. And these deficit hawks, you know, they blocked everything Obama wanted to do, even to repair the economy that was deeply damaged by the Republicans leading up to the meltdown in 2008. And one of the things that I see in this picture is that Obama failed to properly label the so-called Great Recession as a Republican failure. He should have done it at the time. He should have done it in 12, and it should have been a centerpiece of the presidential campaign for both Clinton and Sanders last year. And so we know this is going to add massively to the deficits, both the annual budget shortfall and the accumulated debt of the United States. And the people who were so determined to prevent that are all lining up to say, oh, yeah, I want some of that tax cut crack. And that's what it boils down to. Republicans are really incoherent, irrational about this. Susan Collins of Maine extracted a commitment that the property tax deduction will be added back up to a $10,000 annual limit. Now, here in California, there are working families that routinely pay more than $10,000 a year in mortgage interest. And it appears that's going to be capped at the interest on $500,000 when the average home in the Bay Area is well above that. And the state and local tax deduction hurts states with state income taxes: California, New Jersey, New York, Illinois. Lisa Murkowski of Alaska got language inserted that opens up drilling in the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge, which was declared off limits under the Obama administration. And this is one of the elements that clearly is not related directly to budget issues, and I have no idea how they believe that they can consider this a reconciliation move in the Senate. Did you know that there is a provision that cuts taxes on beer, wine, and liquor producers, saving them $420 million per year? Yeah, and that was inserted by the son of Roy Blunt, the Republican senator from Missouri. His son is a registered lobbyist for Miller Coors. Surprise, surprise, surprise. $300 billion of the package is raised by allowing companies who stash profits offshore to repatriate it at a much lower rate. And Ryan Grimm, writing at The Intercept today, notes that while it is technically true that this bill represents the largest tax cuts in American history, it also represents the largest tax increases, mostly on the middle class, depending on how you define that. The bill raises $1.6 trillion over 10 years by repealing the personal exemption. This is extraordinarily regressive because whether you earn $10,000 or $10 million, well, the loss of that obviously is not going to impact high-income earners. $600 billion goes to reducing taxes on pass-throughs, and they claim this is to help mom-and-pop businesses. But it's real estate empires like Trump. He's got 500 pass-through entities. It's doctors, lawyers, hedge funds. And yes, some individuals like me, I run a business, it's called a sole proprietorship. It's a pass-through entity. But we know that the biggest benefit of that change will be to high-income proprietors of different kinds of firms. So what we have is, as I said earlier, the largest tax cut and the biggest tax increase in American history. And, of course, it's just another broken promise of Trump to the idiots who voted for him, who thought that he was going to help the beleaguered, white, working-class American. Well, it's not happening that way. You want to comment? I want to hear from you. The whole reason I do the Friday Facebook feed here is so I can take your phone calls and get your input, your reaction, your commentary on the news that I'm covering. So if you're watching on Facebook Live right now, first I ask you to share the video with your network so we can get more people watching. And then I ask you to pick up that fancy smartphone of yours and dial in. Call the Peter B. Collins podcast at 415-455-0102. Ann is threatening to call from Florida today, and I hope we do hear from her. But I'd like to hear your comments on the tax package. And here's a real late-breaking insult. One of the things that I've predicted is that no matter what form the bill is passed by the Senate ends up in, it will necessarily go to a House-Senate conference committee run entirely by Republicans. And that's where additional dirty work will be done. But right now, and I checked on C-SPAN just before I sat down behind the microphone, the Senate has not moved to a vote. They are considering a range of amendments. And Missouri Senator Claire McCaskill has a lobbyist buddy over there on K Street in Washington, D.C., who sent her the laundry list, including the name of the senator who is tasked with introducing the amendments. These are amendments that none of the Democratic senators have even seen. They don't even know the title of these amendments. But the lobbyists do. The lobbyists likely wrote not just the title, but the entire amendment. And for example, one of them that Orrin Hatch is assigned to introduce, he's the senator from Utah, would strike the provision treating name and logo royalties as taxable. Now, who do we know who makes the lion's share of his business income from licensing his name to hotels and failed casinos? That would be the guy who has lied to us by saying that, this tax bill is going to cost him a lot. No, Trump gets benefits from almost every section of this tax package. The pass-through, the elimination of the alternative minimum tax, the only tax return we've seen of his from 2005 showed that the alt-min cost him $35 million in a single year. And it was written specifically to extract tax payments from people who have ways of avoiding them, like using real estate partnerships, the losses they generate, etc. And Paul Krugman comments on what he calls the outright lies that have marked every aspect of the marketing of this huge turd. Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said his department had a study showing great effects on growth. That is a lie. Trump says the bill is not good for me. That's a lie. Senator John Cornyn said this is not a bill that is designed primarily to benefit the wealthy and the large businesses. Clearly a lie. Senator Bob Corker said he won't support a plan adding 1 penny to the deficit. Well, we haven't seen his vote yet, but I predict that he will get along and go along with his Republican buddies. And I'm afraid, as I sit here right now, that it's going to pass into law. And that's why I refer to this as the true Black Friday. Late yesterday, the New York Times posted a story showing how Trump, over the past few months, especially during the summer, was actively lobbying members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, including its chair, Richard Burr of North Carolina, to wrap up the Russia investigation, to get it over with, to put it aside, to bury it. And Trump uses clever language like he did with James Comey. I hope you can do this. I wish. And that may skirt right up against the language of the law. And what is amazing to see is one Republican senator after another who has been improperly, illegally lobbied by Trump. They say, oh, well, he's new to Washington. Let it pass. He doesn't really understand how all these things work and what's appropriate and what's not. And that's bullshit. He talked to Roy Blunt. He talked to Mitch McConnell. He talked to Richard Burr. California Senator Feinstein, former chair of the Intelligence Committee, said that Trump's requests are inappropriate, represent a breach of the separation of powers. It is pressure that should never be brought to bear by an official when the legislative branch is in the process of an investigation. But listen to this carefully crafted denial from the White House, from Raj Shah. At no point has Mr. Trump attempted to apply undue influence on committee members. There's no evidence of collusion, and these investigations must come to a fair and appropriate completion. And it's described how Trump, when there were no senior aides in the Oval Office with him, would pick up the phone, call a senator, and begin a conversation about something else, and then turn it to his desire to end the Russia probe. Well, today, Mike Flynn, as has been widely speculated now for the last couple of weeks, took a guilty plea on a single count of lying to the FBI. Flynn, the former national security advisor, a former general, the former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency who was fired from that post by Obama, Well, he has pled guilty to lying. And I can imagine that tonight, on her telenovela, Rachel Maddow's going to go into overdrive. This is it. This is what we've seen. Now, this is clearly a threat to Trump. Mike Flynn is dirty. He has now accepted a guilty plea. He is convicted of lying to the FBI. He has pledged his cooperation in a deal that allegedly spares his son, Mike Flynn Jr., from any charges. But Crown Prince Jared Kushner has been drawn into the mix here in a way that could lead to his indictment, or at minimum, his resignation. Because it turns out that Mike Flynn, when he came clean, told Bob Mueller's investigators that he checked with Jared before and after he made calls to the Russian ambassador Kislyak related to the sanctions that Obama had announced against Russia and related to the upcoming UN vote, which was critical of Israel's settlement policy and which, at the end of its administration, the Obama team allowed to go forward. So this becomes serious. But it doesn't prove that Russia manipulated our election. It doesn't prove that there was collusion between the Trump campaign, whether Mike Flynn or Jared Kushner or anyone else, to tip the election in favor of Trump. It doesn't prove that Russia hacked the DNC and gave that information to WikiLeaks, which is the centerpiece, the foundation of the whole sweeping Russiagate scandal. And so, yes, this is serious. And I want to recap my position because not everybody hears every podcast I do. I understand that. I think Trump is in deep doo-doo. I believe they're building a case that he has obstructed justice, not just with the firing of FBI Director Comey. And yes, Trump, many of his appointees, including Mike Flynn, Paul Manafort, they have deep and dirty ties to Russia. But I remain skeptical of the claim that Russia hacked the DNC, that Russia tilted the election. And I await the evidence to surface in public. And my pal Nancy Walton in Montana asks a question on Facebook here, is that Kushner's resignation wouldn't mean that he couldn't still be indicted, and that's correct. But he could be pardoned by Trump as part of a resignation package, which would at least complicate that process. So what we have here is, an important new step by the special counsel. And Ty Cobb, the White House lawyer running the defense for the president and his team, says nothing about the guilty plea or the charge implicates anyone other than Flynn. The conclusion of this phase of the special counsel's work demonstrates again that the special counsel is moving with all deliberate speed and clears the way for a prompt and reasonable conclusion. What are you smoking there, Ty Cobb? That is some heavy-duty wishful thinking. Now, in the same plea deal, Flynn has acknowledged lying in his foreign agent disclosure forms when he claimed that he didn't know the extent of the Turkish government's involvement in a contract that his firm obtained. He got paid $500,000. He wrote an op-ed encouraging the U.S. government to expel Fethullah Gulen from Pennsylvania. And that, I believe, is a much bigger crime than basically jumping the gun and performing his duties as a national security advisor before he was actually installed. Now, the fact that Kushner and perhaps Mike Pence approved his contacts, Flynn's contacts, also implicates them. And what we're seeing here are the clear outlines of a Trump administration cover-up. What we don't really know is what they're covering up. So I have a copy of the plea deal and indictment here. You can find it online. It's an interesting read. It's only about 8 pages. And what it shows is, in simple terms, Flynn has pled guilty to willfully, knowingly making materially false, fictitious, and fraudulent statements and representations to the FBI. Now, they can certainly add new charges as more evidence surfaces and as other people cooperate or are coerced by Robert Mueller's special counsel office. But to date, we are still here with no public evidence of the Trump-Russia narrative. And the other day, Wednesday, I released a very difficult interview that I conducted with my long-term colleague and personal friend, Jason Leopold. And I shared the criticism that I talked with you about 3 weeks ago, maybe longer, when Jason's article about a guy named Johnston, who was the CrowdStrike consultant hired by the Democratic National Committee to investigate the breach of their servers, and who almost immediately concluded that Russia was responsible. And I took Jason to task for what I thought was an article that came up well short of his journalistic standards. I'm going to play an excerpt from my conversation with Jason that begins with the final comments from Kyle Kyleman, who called into the program, I believe it was 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 now, and he shared his lament that Jason Leopold is someone he has highly respected, but that this article, he said, is almost garbage. Now, Jason took some offense to that, but I believe he needs to hear from me and you and Kyle about how we respond to journalism, where he dismissed Bill Binney's claims out of hand, did not even confront Mr. Johnston with them, or if he did, he declined to report on it. That's what Jason said when I asked him that. But take a listen here, and I invite you to call with your comments about the Russiagate narrative, about the status of it today, and about Jason Leopold's article in BuzzFeed about the contractor for CrowdStrike.
Yeah, this is it's very concerning to have somebody who I've considered to be, in the top echelon of trustworthiness suddenly produce essentially garbage.
Well, so there you have it, Jason. That's
oh my God,
Kyle's take.
Peter, I mean, I don't know how you want me to react to that. Essentially produce garbage. I produced an article on the guy who was at the center of this, okay? Mm-hmm. You can disagree with it. Listeners can disagree with it. Fans and former fans can disagree with it, okay? I explain in the article what happened when he saw it, and what should I have done? Killed my story? He offered, an explanation, and in the context of the Joint Chiefs. So he, explained how he came to figure out or believe that this was, hackers associated with Russia. As I noted when we first started speaking, this is so highly politically charged, with so much, feelings of distrust toward the DNC, and the way in which the DNC has operated. And I think that's totally warranted, by the way. And so I feel that lots of criticism is, in a way sort of, directed at or the feelings, the strong feelings that people have, as if I'm trying to defend, what the DNC is saying. There's nothing I can do about that, Peter.
All right,
the only thing I can continue doing is reporting, is trying to find that evidence, and I'm going to continue reporting. And I'm perfectly okay if people, have an opinion of my work or something like this that's garbage. I tend to disagree, and other people disagree. So I understand that some people feel differently about it, but I always strive to find documentary evidence and to stand that up.
Jason Leopold's comments in our in-depth interview posted on Wednesday here at peterbcollins.com. And I've got a caller here. We'll go to you in just a second. But before I do, I always like to take a moment to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like George Reeves, Susan Lundgren, and Benny Alto, who's a very generous guy from Oregon, who's got an annual subscription and a monthly subscription for each one of his pets. And I believe he has 3 of them. So my thanks to all of you who support my work here. And if you haven't taken advantage of the opportunity to do so, visit peterbcollins.com, click on menu, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. Takes you to the sign-up page, and there you can choose a level of support that fits your budget. And I hope you'll do that. Let's go to the phones here on line 1. Who's this, please?
Hey, Peter, it's Ian Berman.
Hi, Ian. Thanks for calling in today. What's on your mind?
My pleasure. Hey, regarding your extended interview, I think you did a terrific job of trying to press the issues of what he didn't cover without trying to turn off someone who's a very good interview subject for the future. That being said, I think he avoided all your questions in doing so. My sense is that he didn't want to go into the issues that you raised in the same way that he didn't do it in his article, and it seems like just a turn in the wind that he took covering this type of issue where he's not really going towards other people who could shed some light. Instead, he focused on what he said he wanted to look at with this one particular person interview.
Right. And Ian, I do give Jason credit. He is the first person to find this guy Johnston and interview him. But from there is where I depart. And as I pointed out in the interview and in my comments prior to that, the framing of the article accepts as fact the allegations that are unproven by any public evidence and are substantiated only by leaks and anonymous sources, that Russia hacked the DNC and gave that information to WikiLeaks, which then used it to undermine the candidacy of Hillary Clinton. And that is what is unproven. And the problem we have is that the media now treats that as fact. And as you pile on Mike Flynn's plea deal and Papadopoulos and Manafort and Davis, his name's not Davis, it's Gates. I apologize for that. But, people then just say, aha. And now there are many average Americans who get their news from television or Facebook or, they don't read, they don't really investigate themselves. And they think impeachment is around the corner. But, let's say Bob Mueller comes up with a strong case. Let's say he actually finds that my suspicions are wrong and that there is evidence that Russia hacked the DNC. What's he going to do about it? Is he going to indict a sitting president who can then use the legal process to delay, at least until he's out of office, any substantial hearing on these issues? Or are we going to, turn to the Republicans in Congress who just, bulldozed over the Constitution and legitimate legislative practice in their efforts to try to ram through this tax deal? And so
right.
I want to be realistic. And I know a lot of people, I read them on Facebook every day. And with each little item that drops, they say, aha, that's it. Trump is almost gone. Well, I'm sorry to tell you that, when Prince Harry and Meghan get married next spring, and I had to include that because I have boycotted their story all week. But, this is going to continue. And even as damaging information, even solid evidence, that would cause a conviction in an ordinary court case, Trump is going to be able to dance around this for quite a while.
Right. Well, I think one of the things that stood out is the way Jason said, well, yes to all that, but I've actually seen some things that I can't talk about. Now, if you want to just dismiss that, that's fine. And I'm like, yes, I do. I do want to dismiss that, because if you're not sharing it, then you're throwing it out there as totally worthless. Until we have something hard, and you went through a lot of the steps in terms of the report that was released, your discussion with Benny, and he had no answers to any of them.
Yeah. And Ian, just pause for a second, because I have here a brief clip from Bill Binney. And, if people want to dispute the Bill Binney theorem, which is related to the download speeds, and, therefore he concludes it was a leak and not a hack, that's arguable, but it's never been fully explored, and it is being dismissed before any real consideration of its merits. But this is a much less technical argument that I find extremely compelling, and that is that if the DNC had been hacked by Russia or any other outside operative, the NSA would know. Let's listen.
NSA has so many traceroute programs on the network, hundreds and hundreds of them, all around the world, and they've got all the collection in the world, especially in the United States. They have over 100 tapping points in the United States where they're capturing everything off the fiber lines and storing it in places like Utah or San Antonio or NSA over here or various other places. And if anything was going across the network, they could. I mean, it's like, could you miss a pig passing through a python? No, it's a big bulge in the middle. That's the kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And all they need is a couple of packets. They don't need the whole thing, because buried in every packet is the originating and ending, ultimate ending points of the transmission.
Right.
That's the only way the machines know how to get the packets to one place to another in the network.
So I consider that quite definitive, and
right.
It is really throwing down the gauntlet to the deep state. If you've got evidence, produce it and show
right.
it to us, and then we can actually do something with it. But this innuendo and the trust me approach is something I reject. And frankly, I am disappointed that Jason Leopold, who has worked so hard to build a reputation based on getting government documents that prove certain things, and that show that there were lies or misrepresentations about a specific issue. That is very powerful journalism of the highest order. But, his story about Johnston was not completely based on anonymous sources, but there were there's one named source and I believe 14 anonymous ones. And we're told that, well, just trust us. And frankly, I don't, Ian.
Right, and you raised it's really 2 points. One about Benny had said about the speeds, and two about the NSA nodes. And these are factual matters that can be addressed, and they're just not. And I can't help but thinking about the election statistics between the actual vote and the exit polls, mm-hmm. and how, again, statistics is a very exact mathematical science. You can't just say, oh, well, those things aren't right, because there are margins of errors, and there's vast differences beyond margins of errors. So when you look at the work that Mark Crispin Miller has done, expanding upon the other gentlemen who have actually done the direct studies, showing how far off the exit polls were from the reported results, mm-hmm. You'll see that people are just ignoring basic factual scientific evidence.
Well, and I find it ironic, because we have many Democrats who fully believe, as I do, in the human impacts on the climate, mm-hmm. and they cite science as the basis, and they ridicule people who are deniers and who deny the science. Yet,
right.
when you bring basic science to an issue like Russiagate and say, let's be logical here, then what you get are smear attacks on Bill Binney.
Right.
And
right. I mean, and if you could, who could you pick as a more impeccable third party? Top technical guy at the NSA before he left, because he was calling out fraud and corruption.
Mm-hmm.
What third party who's outside the system would have more expertise, more knowledge, and established more patriotism than Bill Binney?
Yeah.
But yet they want to destroy him.
Ian, thanks a lot for your call. I appreciate hearing from you today, and I'd like to hear from you next at 415-455-0102, 455-0102. And I got a couple of interesting comments about the Jason Leopold conversation. One from Ford Green, and I blush as I read this to you. It does undermine my basic humility. He says, masterful dialogue with Jason Leopold yesterday. You operated at a fine vibration. Very effective milking. Well, he's using my honeybee metaphor. He says the honeybee operated at a fine vibration and was very effective milking those flowers for the truth. Best voice in the business. Your mastery of maintaining an even-keeled tone is matched by none. Zero hysteria, zero drama, zero BS. Resonates with deep respect for your guest, the subject matter, and the process. You don't get sidetracked. You're relentless. I wish I could be as good a talker as you are. And he ends with some of the best radio ever. Paul Elsesser, a longtime benefactor of my podcast, he said, I really enjoyed your recent interview with Greg Palast. He sounds as frustrated as we all are about the lack of truth in our world. And if you haven't found time to listen to the Palast interview, please do. And if you need to, if you only have 15 minutes, listen to the last 15 minutes. Because that's where he says, this is going to ruin my career. And then excoriates the Russiagate narrative and fingers domestic suspects who flipped the election for Trump. Elsesser goes on, the Jason Leopold interview may show how far the deep state has penetrated the online media. His arguments for Russian hacking are just like the intelligence agencies. Trust us. His article is an evidence-free puff piece trying to build up Robert Johnston, the former CrowdStrike employee. The article never mentions where Johnston was trained, only that he graduated from the Naval Academy. As you pointed out, he failed to mention Bill Binney's theorem or even ask Johnston about the possibility of a leak. He also touts the malware that has been available online for a while, as if it is proof. The only positive on Leopold is he came on your podcast and faced your questions. Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Ford. I appreciate your complimentary remarks. I'm waiting for the next call, so get on the line and we'll take your call and your comment as soon as you do so at 415-455-0102. Now, here in the Bay Area, people are pretty shocked. And I'm pretty sure that the sensation travels across the country because of the demonization of the undocumented suspect in the killing of Kate Steinle, a young white woman who was strolling on a pier with her father on a beautiful day in San Francisco when a gunshot felled her and killed her. And this case was nationalized and turned into a political wedge issue by Trump, who used it as a way of rallying his white nationalists against immigrants during last year's campaign. And I want to tell you how proud I am of Matt Gonzalez. He is the San Francisco public defender. He ran as the vice presidential nominee with Ralph Nader in 2008. He is a former far-left San Francisco County and City Supervisor, and he took on this case despite the climate that had been created by Trump and that was exaggerated by many other people who piled on with the Nancy Grace-style instant judgment. She's dead, he's guilty. And because he's, an illegal immigrant, case closed. Well, Matt Gonzalez, he lawyered on, and he presented a compelling case that his client, Jose Inez Garcia Zarate, a man with a second-grade education, who was homeless on the streets of San Francisco, he found a gun under a bench, and when he picked it up, his story is that it went off. And the key testimony that I think caused the jury to treat this as an accident and not even involuntary manslaughter, which was charged but not found by the jury, is that the bullet ricocheted off the cement sidewalk after it left the gun and before it hit Kate Steinle. And I want to take a moment to talk about the Steinle family. Her parents have managed their tragedy and objected to the attempt to politicize their loss by the president and others. And they've shown, I think, real composure in a situation where that is very hard to come by. So I did expect at minimum an involuntary manslaughter conviction. But Zarate faces only a conviction of being a felon in possession of a weapon, and I believe that he will be sentenced to time served and then deported for the 6th or 7th time. Now, Trump, of course, responds to this with outrage and, once again, a lack of presidential decorum. And somehow he thinks that building the wall will keep someone like Zarate, who, when you illegally enter the country 6 times, you're really determined to live in the United States. And I don't know if he was driven by poverty or a threat to his personal safety. I don't know that much about Zarate. But in addition to my compliments to Matt Gonzalez, the Public Defender of the Year, in my opinion, this jury deserves praise. They had to be aware of the circus atmosphere created by Trump, the high expectation that they find Zarate guilty, and the fear that they would face criticism from Trump and many others if they, after 6 days of deliberation, returned the verdict that they did. So the orange idiot tweeted, "A disgraceful verdict in the Kate Steinle case. No wonder the people of our country are so angry with illegal immigration." Now, he doesn't point out that the gun was left by a federal officer in his car, from which it was stolen and somehow wound up on the pier. There is no inference of any kind that Zarate was responsible for boosting the gun from the federal agent's car. But that part of the case is, well, it's lost because we've got a brown guy we can demonize. Then Trump tweeted, "The Kate Steinle killer came back and back over the weakly protected Obama border, always committing crimes and being violent. He was never convicted of a violent crime. That is a flat-out lie." Now, Trump can tweet with impunity. There's fact-checking after the fact, but hey, he can pander to his ignorant base. But the only felonies that Zarate has been convicted of are repeatedly being deported. He was brought to San Francisco after completing a sentence for illegally entering the country to face a 20-year-old charge for a possession of marijuana or dealing marijuana that amounted to less than $50. And why the feds returned him here has never been explained. He could have been deported at that time. But people never play those hypotheticals. They simply say, gosh, if he hadn't gotten into the country, this never would have happened. But you don't know that. Somebody else could have picked up that gun, and a similar incident could have occurred. So this is all politics, and I'm really glad that an able public defender was able to protect the presumption of innocence for Zarate. And in post-trial interviews, Matt Gonzalez has pointed out to Jeff Sessions and to Donald Trump that the time may come very soon when they will want to avail themselves of the presumption of innocence. Enough said. I mentioned earlier that Jeff Flake of Arizona, who has decided not to seek another term, he was standing proud against the Republican tax cut for the wealthy and corporations bill. But he caved after being promised vaguely that they'll take care of the DACA kids. Well, now we learn a big insult. Back in September, when Trump announced that he was canceling the protections for DACA young people, He just threw it into the Congress, where he knows they have never been able to deal with these matters. And it triggered a 30-day deadline to October the 5th for DACA people, I don't know what the right term is, applicants, to renew their work permits. And at least 4,000 of those renewal applications were rejected because they arrived after the deadline. Now, we reported here a few weeks back that originally lawyers in Chicago and New York identified 74 people whose renewals had been delayed by mysterious problems with the U.S. Postal Service. They could track the packages right up to the point of delivery to the, what is it called, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services office, and then suddenly they were not delivered. Well, the agency has now admitted that there were 900 DACA applications that mysteriously arrived after the deadline, even though they were postmarked with plenty of time to be delivered in a timely manner. Here's another big lie that's being exposed. On November 18th, there was an incident along the border where 2 Border Patrol agents, one who died and one who was seriously injured, well, we were told that this was caused by illegal aliens, that they had been attacked, and in specific, that one of them had been bludgeoned to death with rocks. Trump piled on, tweeting, "Border Patrol officer killed at southern border, another badly hurt. We will seek out and bring to justice those responsible. We will and must build the wall." Only we now know from the sheriff of Culberson County, Texas, Oscar Carrillo, that it was an accident. And he said, look, if this were an assault, believe me, as sheriff, I'd be the first one out there emphasizing safety in our community and with our deputies. But from what I know and see, that was not the case here. The Border Patrol Union had speculated that the agent who died was ambushed by a group of illegal aliens. Well, a tractor trailer was the likely cause of the injuries to Agent Rogelio Martinez, who died. Who needs facts? Especially when you're on Twitter, man, you can just say whatever you want. And the president's tweets that angered not only the Prime Minister of Britain, but also subjected him to deep ridicule by members of the Parliament this week. Just another reason to take that damn phone away from him. In Washington today, on the House side at the Ethics Committee, the ethics panel has demanded the release of all records of settlements for sexual harassment in the House of Representatives. Now, the little-known Office of Compliance, which handles these kinds of settlements and payouts, has coughed up $17 million in taxpayer money to pay out settlements and awards to complaining federal employees. Today, the leaders of the House Ethics Committee called on the Office of Compliance to promptly hand over all records related to claims of sexual harassment. And the latest person accused is a venerated man of the theater, Israel Horovitz. He is a founding artistic director of the Gloucester Stage in Massachusetts, and 9 women have come forward to accuse him of various types of fondling, groping, and I believe in one case an outright rape. What is interesting about this case is that his son is now more famous than he is, at least with a certain segment of the population. Adam Horovitz is a founding member of the Beastie Boys. And he issued a statement, quote, "I believe the allegations against my father are true, and I stand behind the women who made them." And finally today, I know that almost every day now, you'll get a knock on the door or you come home and there's a package there from Amazon. It's ubiquitous. They are the biggest online retailer, And I don't do much consuming, but I was at our local malls last night because today is Kathy's birthday. Happy birthday, Kathy. And the place was deserted. There were only 5 people in the Apple store, and everywhere else I went, there were more clerks than customers. And Amazon is a big source of this. Now, before you get all excited about your Amazon packages, please consider the workers who pack those boxes at these robotic facilities spread out across the country and across the world. And we learned at the Amazon Shipping Center in Sacramento, a lawsuit surfaced earlier this week, that workers there are denied regular breaks, overtime pay, and time to travel from the clock-in area to their workstations during regular shifts of 10-plus hours. And the article doesn't tell us how little they are paid, but it's $15 an hour or less. An attorney for one of the plaintiffs said, "We have been learning of sweatshop-like conditions for workers who work long shifts and have not been able to get the appropriate rest breaks and overtime that is required." And London's tabloid paper, the Sunday Mirror, sent a reporter with an undercover camera that he purchased on Amazon, and they have now published the results of their undercover investigation. Alan Selby is the reporter who went undercover for 5 weeks at the new warehouse in Tilbury, that is in Essex, in England. And he writes, "Alone in a locked metal cage 10 feet from my nearest colleague, a robot approaches from the shadows and thrusts a tower of shelves toward me. I have 9 seconds to grab and process an item to be sent for packing. A target of 300 items an hour, for hour after relentless hour. Welcome to Amazon's picking floor. Here, while cameras watch my every move, a screen in front of me offers constant reminders of my units per hour and exactly how long each has taken." This is the online giant's biggest European packing plant, set to shipping 1.2 million items a year. I spent 5 weeks at this new warehouse in Tilbury, Essex, armed with a secret camera bought from Amazon's own website. I found staff asleep on their feet, exhausted from toiling for up to 55 hours a week. Those who could not keep up with the punishing targets faced the sack, and some who buckled under the strain had to be attended to by ambulance crews. In Italy and Germany, staff have gone on strike, complaining of low pay and poor conditions, and employees at a UK warehouse have told of sleeping in tents and under bridges just to get to work on time. He says, "My body ached, and my fitness tracker showed that I walked at least 10 miles at work most days." These are huge facilities. They describe them as the size of 10 football pitches or soccer fields. And he says, "Despite being a marathon runner, the physical effort left me feeling dizzy. I worried I might keel over if I kept pushing myself as hard as I needed to meet my targets. One colleague was taken to hospital by ambulance when they collapsed on the job. Another ambulance was called after a girl suffered a panic attack when she was told compulsory overtime would mean her working up to 55 hours a week over Christmas." The place is so vast, he said it's the size of 11 football pitches. And it is so vast that just walking to the toilet could take more than 5 minutes, almost a third of a mile from some of my workstations, and even longer when those on my floor were out of order, as they often were. So this is a new form of indentured servitude. Yes, they are paid, and yes, they are free to leave if they don't want to accept the work. But this is the high price of low-cost goods, conveniently delivered to your home by Jeff Bezos, who reportedly made $1 billion personally on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast here at peterbcollins.com. and online at Facebook Live Video. I always appreciate your comments. Email Peter at peterbcollins.com.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling